Now, what does a real man do when Hollywood releases a film based on a classic book, right? He goes out and reads it. Now, I actually didn't read this because the movie was coming out. I actually had it on my backlog for a long time. I bought it some time ago, years and years ago, I think, and I just had it lying around because I think maybe it was because the first one came out. It definitely wasn't the new one, the one that the second one, part two. Uh, I was I read the book when I was very young. Well, not that young. When I was in high school. I remember it being recommended to me. I remember checking it out. I remember reading through it and not being very into it, right? It was one of those situations where I read a book and didn't necessarily understand the appeal. And reading it again, I do still have those feelings, at least for the second half, right? Well, at least for the first half. I read the first half and immediately was brought back to like what confused me about the reading it the first time, right? I didn't like the omniscient narrator. I didn't understand the politics. I didn't understand like the setting. It's set in the future, but everyone acts and talks like they're in a fantasy setting, right? You have all these like concepts that aren't explained all that well, laser guns and shields and atomics and the guild, right? The Imperium, right? Like all this jargon is just thrown at you, and it's kind of difficult to process, right? For me, I really really struggled with it. Now, uh, and reading it again, I I came away with a much better impression of it, especially during the second half, right? Like I still kind of stand by my opinion. Like the fact that I've had to read this twice and go through that like first couple of chapters and be like introduced to all these characters, none of which really leave much of an impact on me. Paul, Jessica, the old Ben Gesserit woman, like uh, Duke Lita. Like I was reading this the first half of the book and kind of felt the same way, right? Like who are all these people, right? Like I was still kind of put off by it, didn't understand it, didn't process it very well. Maybe a big part of it was because it took me so long to get through it, right? Because I think I read it like I started it and put it aside for a long time, right? But I was not impressed with it initially, right? I was not impressed with Dune until much later on. Right. To me, like I don't think Dune starts to like really establish itself as like a legit great novel until Paul and Jessica get to the desert, right? Their ornithopter has crashed. They're out there in the wilderness, right? And like all this stuff that like has been set up like in regards to like how dangerous Arrakis is, the worms, like the natural conditions, even like the ordinary wildlife, like this is incredibly inhospitable territory, right? This is like this is borderline like uninhabitable for humans, right? And the novel does a great job kind of emphasizing that, right? It does a great job building up this idea that like Paul and Jessica are going to die. And you do get this sense of like this feeling of dread, this feeling of impact, this feeling of like, this is a legit, really well thought out survival situation, especially since it's so rooted in science fiction, right? That's one of the things that really, really, even when in my first read through that I really appreciated about Arrakis is that the setting is impeccably well thought out. You have like the ecosystem, you have like the culture there, you have the general setup. Like I really, really, really enjoy Arrakis as a setting, and I don't think I'm alone in that. I think one of my big problems with the book, my initial read through, is that like it feels like Arrakis is like really fleshed out and interesting, but not so much like the other planets, right? Like it's crazy, like this, like you're reading this, right, and you don't really learn all that much about like the rest of the universe, right? You don't know, like I don't feel like I understand the current state of humanity, how much the Imperium controls, like how the great houses were set up. Like again, I brought this up before, right? And I had this problem like reading the book the second time as well. Maybe I had this problem the first time as well. Like I felt like I don't understand why humanity would have developed this way, right? Like returning to like the monarchist system with like, these tyrants ruling everything. Like it makes sense from Paul's perspective, how he like, seizes control of the freemen, how he utilizes his skills and talents and like uses these people and their resources to take over Arrakis and by extension the universe because of their over reliance on spice, right? Like that aspect makes sense of it. Makes sense to me, right? But like the rest of the Imperium, I just don't follow along with it. It's one of those things where I'm just like, I don't know, am I missing something? Am I not processing it correctly? Is this stuff fleshed out in further books? Do I need to stop like thinking about it so much? Like again, it's just one of those things where I'm just kind of like I don't feel like I understand the setting, right? It's one of those things where I'm just like, okay, maybe I have to read more books, maybe I need more context, maybe I need to be paying more attention. Like it feels like I'm too low IQ to like understand what's going on in Dune, right? And I have noticed like when it comes to like the film discourse in particular, how a lot of low IQ individuals are like trying to present this kind of thing. For example, in the movie, the new one, right? There's a thread on Reddit, Kotaku in Action specifically, about how the film is totally not woke, guys, right? Even though they race swapped several characters, they gender bent several characters, they made girl bosses out of specific characters, they ruined the ending, right? There are all these like specific issues with the film. Right, that completely ruins like the meaning of it, like the impact of it, right? Like a big theme of the book, right, I think, is how like marriage isn't defined by the government, right? It isn't defined by cultural norms. It's defined by the person you love and the person you're intimate with, right? Like that's what Jessica's final lines to Shani means, right? That although Paul is marrying Princess Arulin, like he does not truly love her, right? It is purely a political marriage, and his heart will always belong to his concubine, Shani, just like his father, Leto, uh, gave his heart to Jessica, even though it wasn't permissible for whatever reason. I don't I don't even remember why. I don't even recall like processing why exactly Jessica was a concubine and why he never married her. But like like that's kind of the point, right? Is that like the government doesn't have like absolute control over the nature of people, right? And Arrakis is a really good example of just how like a very strong, dedicated, religious group of people can rise up against like supposedly the greatest empire that's ever existed in humanity's history, right? Like the people of Arrakis are hardcore because of like the way they've developed to live on Arrakis, right? The Freemen especially, and that is demonstrated very strongly in the ending and like the setup and just how the Imperium genuinely believe that the people of Arrakis can't live the way they do, right? They can't process like that people like this can exist. It's a really interesting kind of resolution to the novel in this regard that like Paul was able to usurp the Imperium so quickly and so easily. It's really impactful, I think. It really leaves like a really strong impression on you, even though there's like parts of me that feels like it's kind of rushed, right? I like Shawnee as a character, right? But her development with Paul felt kind of rushed, right? I like Paul interacting with the Freeman. I like the idea of him like becoming their messiah and leading them on like the crusade. Like I like all of that, but like again, a lot of it feels kind of rushed. Like a lot of it feels like it happens off screen. Like there's a time skip where apparently a lot of things happen. Da da da. Like he's setting up for like the takeover or whatever. You know, he's making alliances and doing all this thing, like all this stuff. And yeah, it's just one of those things, right? Where you feel like the novel should be longer than it is, right? Like, but like it feels like there's more going on here than like what happens in the text of the novel. It's very much like the opposite of what Game of Thrones is, right? Where like you look at Game of Thrones, you look at how bloated it is, and you're just like, oh man, this is gonna be like this giant novel full of political intrigue. It's gonna be this, 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 this. You're gonna have like hundreds of characters. Like everyone's gonna die. Like nothing's gonna make is going to work out for everyone. It's going to be like this monumental epic fantasy. But then you actually read the book and realize it's bloated. It's contrived. It doesn't make any sense at all. Like it doesn't come together. Like nothing that happens in any of the song of a Song in Ice and Fire books, especially the last two, 4 and 5, not the last two will never be written. When you look at those, like when you compare how bloated they are to this, which is like so much more compact, so much more engaging, so much more interesting, you really get a sense of just how much of a hack fraud George R. Martin really is, because you don't need to go into great detail as to like what every character is doing, where they are, what they're trying to accomplish, um, where they're going, what their goals are. Like in a lot of ways, you can get a lot of that stuff through exposition. All right, you can get a lot of that stuff through dialogue with other characters. You can get a lot of that with just the events that happen organically to the characters that really matter, right? In this case, Paul, right? Like it's crazy how Paul like managed to accomplish more in like one book than anybody in A Song in Fire, Ice and Fire has managed to accomplish in its entire history. It's kind of laughable, really. Like I think a lot of people would make the mistake in thinking this is that it's forced, that it's contrived, like, but I really don't think so. I really think that like all it would take to do something like this is simply to just have a strong group of people behind you, right? And I think Dune does a really good job emphasizing that, in a far better, more effective way than George R. R. Martin, that hack, ever will. You can say a lot about Frank Herbert, you can say a lot about Dune, but at least he wrote a book, right? We'll have to see what the sequels bring to the table. I don't know exactly what the rest of the saga is like. I don't know. I don't believe it was finished. Is that correct? He died. I don't know anything about like the sequels at all, but I believe the first one is the most notable. So I'm definitely very interested in seeing just how the books develop going forward. But until then, I will see you all next time.